I'm going to call the meeting back to order. In terms of accountability update, the board has already took action on the corporation grades, and as you know, we're working on the growth tables to be brought before the board at a later date. So Pearson, I don't know if Rich is back in the audience. I don't see him yet. Could we go ahead and have the TAC update, Cynthia, while we're waiting?
All right, so our first TAC meeting is scheduled for next week, Thursday and Friday, February 11th and 12th. We have 6 members, Ed Raber, who of course you know Dr. Raber, Derek Briggs, of course you know Dr. Briggs, but we also have Carla Egan, who hopefully you remember Carla, also Dr. Egan. But then we also have Karen Barton. She is Vice President of Learning Analytics at Discovery Education. She is formerly the Senior Director of Psychometrics and with Discovery Ed, and she was a Principal Research Scientist with CTB. So she's got a background with CTB too. And then Greg Cizik, he's the Professor of Educational Measurement and Evaluation with University of North Carolina School of Ed. And then Chad Buchendahl, psychometric consultant, formerly with Alpine Testing Solutions and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And these are either people I knew, people were recommended. I worked with Dr. Walker to come up with the list, and so this is where we've landed. Our agenda, we're going to be overviewing policies, staff, the Indiana assessments in general, the transition from DRC to our CTB to Pearson, and some of the psychometrics. These are psychometricians. These are number nerds. So the processes associated with that, we will be going through the validity studies and addressing some of the concerns. We've got several questions that we want their feedback on regarding the validity studies on how we best move forward. We will be also looking at the new ISTAR assessment. Some of our members have specific background with these types of alternative assessments. They worked on, 2 of them at least, worked on NCSIC, and ISTAR is developed to be very similar to NCSIC, which of course is what we gave last year. And we're going to try and get their feedback also on a couple of the bills that are currently out regarding the creation of an assessment committee, because we will hopefully want their feedback and thoughts on that moving forward in the future. It's a very robust agenda, and my guess is we won't get through everything, but we've got some very key things we want to address first off.
Questions for Cynthia? All right. Is Rich back? All right. So ESSA update? Do we have a mechanism to contact Rich? Okay. All right, let's go ahead and do ESSA.
So the ESSA update, we're still digesting ESSA. It's about 1,100-page federal law, and today we'll give you the view from about 10,000 feet. We'll let you know that over the next week or 2, we are signed up to take some webinars from NASB and other providers who are going to give us more additional information on ESA. I think the first stage that we have to get through is federal rulemaking. There are a lot of unanswered questions about what ESSA makes, and I think the feds have to set up some guardrails and provide some guidance to the states, and that rulemaking is ongoing right now. Brian can give you a more specific timeline for that. I think he has that. Brian, can you give them a better sense of what the schedule on rulemaking is?
Yeah, so in the initial webinar, we've already been through one. It was very, very, very high level, and they stressed that at this point, They will be initiating federal rulemaking that answer more questions, and that just is going to add to the complexity of what's already a very lengthy law. In the webinar, they said they're going to begin the transition 16-17, and then with the hopes that there'll be full implementation in 17-18. So I think with each passing week and each passing month, there's going to be a lot of information forthcoming to digest, and board staff will continue to provide that information as we digest this and obtain more information, both from a high level and then also a little more in the weeds through the weekly updates and things like that.
And so the Indiana legislature is in the process of formalizing a committee, I think a 17-member committee, that would look at changes that might need to be made at the state level, just state statute, because of the ESSA. That legislation isn't final, but I think in its current form, it's approximately a 17-member board. I think, Superintendent, you appoint some people to that board.
Are you talking about the assessment committee?
The assessment committee, I think that is supposed to, one of its mandates, if I understand it correctly, is to look at the effects of ESSA on assessment, and I think it may even have a broader mandate, at least in the earlier draft I saw. Some of the areas, regardless of whether we have a committee or not, some of the areas the state legislature will eventually have to look at is how turnaround will be handled, whether teacher evaluations will be part of state law. They're no longer mandated by federal law. What changes might need to be made to the accountability system. Turnaround, specifically, you're going to see more local control over turnaround, I think, at the district level. If I'm understanding what I've been told through some of these webinars, initially turnaround will be handled at a school and district level, but I think perhaps with some state board oversight or approval of quote-unquote evidence-based plans that the schools will be given, I think, 3 to 4 years to implement, and if they are not successful according to state-designated criteria or targets at that point, stricter turnaround efforts may be implemented, I think, at the state level. Accountability, the feds are putting particular emphasis on the various subgroups so that a school in need of some sort of concentrated intervention, or I think they're calling it comprehensive support and intervention, will be judged in part based on the performance of those subgroups. And again, if I understand what I've been told correctly, any subgroup that is performing in the bottom 5% of state performance puts that school in which the subgroup exists in the bottom 5% of state performance. So there's an incentive apparently in federal law to concentrate resources on all subgroups and make sure that none of them are falling behind at the expense of the larger population of the school. Again, that's an area where I think the feds are going to have to help clarify what they mean by that, but that's just our initial high-level read of it. There's a final element, and this goes to a question Dr. Bertram, Dr. Byron Ernest asked me, and whether there were a source of funds to perform audits of assessments at the local level. And if I understand this correctly, there is something called Section 6111 funds available, federal funds possibly available for local units to perform audits of their locally chosen assessment systems to try to gauge the effectiveness of those, perhaps in comparison to other local assessments. I think that's probably because it involves federal funds and Title I funds. Ultimately, I think this is something that falls under the jurisdiction of the SEA. So I think anything involving funding, particularly Title I funding, I'll defer to DOE's interpretation of that, but I just throw that out there because it was a specific question that we were initially given a specific answer to. So those are some of the high-level areas that I think you can expect to concentrate on in the next couple of years. And as Brian said, as we learn more from the webinars and from seminars and so forth, we'll certainly keep the board updated. We're not the only one with these questions. Everybody's kind of in the same boat, wondering what ESSA portends for our state accountability turnaround educational funding system. So I can try to answer questions. I probably can't answer questions, but I'll at least write them down and maybe have an answer at a future board meeting when I actually have an answer. Okay,
Do we
thank
have
you.
any questions at this time? So the summary that you have from the National Conference of State Legislatures is a pretty good overview. We do have CCSSO, which is the chief's information, if you want that to look over as well. I think we sent it to the State Board of Education, so you could forward that. We could forward that to you as well. It goes into a lot more detail, I think, in terms of what was in the old, like a comparison kind of piece as well, that gives you a good indication.
Right, we can put those in the weekly updates. I just want to point out that the National Council of State Legislators, that came out a little early, and it's already inaccurate in some respects. So
Right.
as we get updated information, we'll give that to you. So don't take anything as the gospel initially. This is kind of an evolving understanding. And like I said, as things change, we'll keep you in the loop.
And as John mentioned, all of these entities have things on their website that they're constantly updating with information that flows through in some avenues from the U.S. Department of Education. In addition, we are expecting some formal guidance and some formal rule to actually accompany this as we go through. So this is kind of a year of transition before implementation.
Right.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Superintendent,
Yes.
may I make a statement here? I think
You may.
regarding ESSA as well as just overall accountability, I think given our experience and challenges, it appears to me that we have an opportunity with expanded flexibility under ESSA and the opportunities to redesign an appropriate and sensible education system for our students. I do believe that the best decisions to address student needs are most appropriately made by those closest to them, and our teachers and administrators within our schools. I think the challenge we have is certainly there's a local, state, national imperative to achieve high educational outcomes, but we also, I believe, have this moral and economic imperative to achieve equity and excellence for all students across our state. And we have to get this accountability thing right. But, one of the things that I thought a lot about is we talk about accountability, but we haven't really necessarily answered the question of accountability to whom. I think the real accountability is to our students and making sure that they are prepared to thrive in this evolving world. And I think we have to stop trying to build and maintain an accountability system that resonates with adults and make one that makes sense for students. And I heard some of the testimony earlier today. It was Aristotle said the worst form of inequity is to try to treat unequal things equal. And trying to create a system that addresses all these needs. And so I have a couple questions I just want to pose that perhaps for further discussion is, and when I think about accountability and to the extent of, is this about a test score or is it about high demand skills and preparing our students for college and careers? And how do we measure those things? When I talk with employers all over the country, the things they talk about are professional skills, the ability to collaborate, to communicate effectively, to problem solve, to critically think about, and the design process, and entrepreneurial mindset, and all these things, but yet we're not truly measuring these things. And I also wonder about to what extent we can improve outcomes within a system without challenging the structure of the system itself. We've created a school year, 180 days, 6.5 hours a day. We don't have comprehensive early childhood education, some very fundamental things to the education system, but believing we're going to use policy levers to change the system without changing its structures, I think that is a real challenge for us. And a couple other questions is, how do we recognize the conditions of poverty and other external factors that affect children's ability, not ability to learn, but the opportunity to learn, without the unintended consequence of lowering expectations for our most vulnerable children? And the last question is, how do we achieve transformational systemic improvements opposed to incremental and disconnected efforts that lead to unhealthy disruption and ineffectiveness? I think we have a real opportunity here to rethink the work we're doing. There have been a lot of educational reforms happen in Indiana, but now to take all that experience, everything we've learned from educators across the state, and to redesign a system that makes sense for our students, that really will drive opportunity for them and ensure that they're ready for college and careers. So I think as we talk about accountability, ESSA, I would like for us to take that leadership position. You know, rather than sitting back waiting for people to tell us what we should do or how to do it, why don't we create it and say, here's a model of excellence based on the experience we have in this state. So just wanted to make that statement, but thank you.
And I would respond at least with this board that we've made a commitment to actually do that kind of work. We should begin our work shortly, in my opinion, regarding multiple measures. What does that look like? Because our current accountability system for at least the elementary and middle schools is basically the test. But we committed as a board when we began this process to look at multiple measures. So I hope we're going to engage in that dialogue, because the system that we have, the new system that's going to be in place, allows for all of that to occur, and allows that dialogue to actually happen and to evolve it. So I hope we have that conversation coming up sooner than later.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Our last item will be the continuation of the Pearson update.
Good afternoon.
So we'll give you the opportunity to say anything that you might wish to say in your update, and then I think we may have a couple more questions.
Anything?
Anything you want to say
Be careful.
regarding the Pearson update.
Be careful what you ask for. Actually, Dr. Bertram, you just reminded me of one of the other important differences, going back to our earlier conversation about the difference between paper and online testing, and kind of the relative merits of either one. And with technology-based testing, you can actually do better measurement. You can measure skills, problem solving, thought processes through technology-enhanced items that you can't do on paper. And so I think that's another important thing to keep in mind as you kind of weigh those two options.
I believe there's an article in Ed Week today that has a study showing the performance of students with online testing and paper and pencil testing. And the outcomes are something that we should all pay attention to. And I think will help us perhaps answer the questions that we've been asking today.
Yeah.
Around how do students perform on online tests versus paper and pencil test.
If I remember correctly, that one was focused specifically on writing assessment, paper and online, if I remember correctly. Anyway, I don't want to go into that too much here.
Yeah.
But I know what you're referring to, and I saw the headline. I'm like, wow, that's a attention getter right there.
Questions for Rich? Steve, I think you had some other questions?
Hi, Rich.
Hi.
Just a couple of questions. My monthly question, have you gotten everything from CTB in a timely manner? Is it in your possession, and it is in a format that you can use and implement and place into the new system, the Pearson system?
The last I knew, and this was probably a couple or 3 days ago, there were 2 or 3 things that were outstanding. They're very small. One was permissions on a passage. The test uses copyrighted information, copyrighted passages, and we have to get permission to use those and pay the royalties and so forth. Those were not carried over from CTB, and we've been scrambling to get those in place, and we actually finally just got the last one. The materials were sitting literally on the dock getting ready to ship, and when we got it, so that was a relief. The other is related to some training materials to score, I think, one item or maybe a couple of items on the science assessment. So we're continuing to follow through on those, and I don't know where we are, but we still have some time before those are mission critical for us. But to answer your question, generally, yes. I mean, we're still very much on track. This is by far the busiest we've been yet, and we know that we're going to get even busier in the next 3 months going forward. Our materials are getting ready to ship. The iRead and ISTEP materials, they're scheduled for delivery next week. Schools will have the opportunity to order additional materials after those are delivered through our system. Practice tests are going out. Training is beginning, as I referred to earlier. There's a lot of activity going on right now, and we're still on track.
On track means it'll be in the hands it needs to be in the form it needs to be in order for it to be implemented into whatever is coming up for you and your company to implement into our ISTEPs.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is the contract between Pearson and DOE, is that all finalized?
Yep.
And everything's signed? And
Yep, that was signed on December 23rd.
you're comfortable with where both sides are?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you.
Yes. There's some work that we need to do, and I think we referred in a letter, we need to make some amendments to kind of clean some things up, but that's par for the course with contracts like this.
Thank you.
Sarah?
My question was actually regarding those amendments. I know that there was a letter that was responded to in the area of error processing, and then also, what was it? The
Deadlines for paper and online.
versus
Yep.
paper pencil deadlines.
Yep.
So I know that Pearson responded with some language that they would approve going into those amendments.
Yep.
Have those been signed off? Where are we at? And this might be a question for the department instead of Pearson, but where are we at in terms of making sure that that is finalized within the contract?
Yeah, that was something else that Dr. Hartzer and I discussed this morning, and we're underway with that process to amend the contract and get it brought up to date.
Okay. So we won't have any issues then in terms of any of the
No,
paper
I mean,
pencil add-on?
Through that letter, we're on the record committing to,
Right.
greater transparency for error reporting and to flexibility around paper and online decisions. In fact, I think a communication went out just this morning or last night regarding districts or corporations and schools' ability to switch to paper if they feel it's necessary for Part 1 or for iRead. There are also some that have expressed an interest in switching to online, and so we're looking to see if we can accommodate that as well. There's a lot of give and take in contracts like this and managing these programs, and like I said, we're on the record as being willing to provide that kind of flexibility because that's really what's needed to be successful.
Is there a reason for the holdup in getting, because that was sent back in December, I believe. Is there a reason for the holdup in getting that finalized?
That's probably on me.
Okay.
25 hours in a day would be great.
Yeah, understood.
When you said underway, define underway.
We've started the discussions about what needs to be in that amendment. Obviously, the things that we've talked about in our letter. There have been some staffing changes that, because of contractual requirements and notice and so forth, that we need to get updated. Those are documented in the contract. There have been some, scope elements that have changed as well. We did a small-scale pilot back in the fall for some of the writing prompts that wasn't included in the contract. Just kind of cleanups like that we need to get all brought together.
Yes, Gordon?
As you probably know, there's legislation in the Indiana House and Senate regarding ISTEP.
Yep.
And potentially even ending it.
Yep.
Does Pearson have a reaction to that or response to that? And then secondly, what are the provisions under the contract? Obviously, it's a 2-year contract.
Mm-hmm.
If it were terminated early, what would be the fiscal impact to the state as well as well, I'll just end there.
Yeah. So I don't want to give a sales pitch for, what happens in 2018 and what Pearson can and can't do and so forth. But I will go back to the earlier statement that whatever Indiana decides to do, I think it's really, really important to focus on the impact to the field and trying to minimize the significance of the change in terms of resetting baselines and breaking those trends. I think it's possible to take ISTEP and make it into something else that gives you the things that you're looking for. Student-centered assessment, maybe something more than just pass-fail. better integration with formative assessment, for example, so that you've got a more continuous process instead of a, one-time, event at the end of the year with so many things heaped on top of it. There's time to have those conversations, fortunately. We have things that we need to do because we have a contract with the department, and then we have things that we would like to be able to do that are not part of that contract. We want to be part of those conversations as appropriate because we have a lot of things that we have to offer, in terms of ideas, capabilities, and so forth, and I'll stop the sales pitch there.
Is there my second question was, is there some kind of termination provision in the contract, and what is that?
I don't know. There usually is. It's usually related to funding. If funding is no longer available, there are outs. I don't know what they are, but I mean, we actually have already started working on the 2017 test, some of the early planning.
Sure.
Just these are long cycles.
Well, and I'm just asking those questions because there is, it's being looked at. So I'll just end there.
Okay.
Thanks.
Carrie?
My question isn't necessarily for you, but in bringing up CTB, so I may need Danielle or someone else. Sorry, Danielle. In talking about CTB and the contract and them moving things over to you, is there any consequence in terms of CTB and in terms of the delay with things this year, or?
Oh, you're talking about damages?
Yes.
So I believe our legal team is still working on that with the Attorney General's office.
Okay.
I don't know that there's any further update.
Yeah,
No, there's no update. We have an attorney assigned to us with the Attorney General's office who's investigating what, if any, claims we may have against CTB. So I don't have a copy of the CTB contract. I don't remember if there is provisions for delays and handing off, as they call it, technical and other things necessary for another vendor to come in. So off the top of my head, I don't remember on that.
as things progress with that, would you keep us posted on that? I know not only, I mean, other people are interested, the public's interested in,
It's sticky because-
it's taken a long time to get results.
Sure.
And, people see that as a problem and want to know if there's anything to come of it. And so, if you could follow up,
Sure.
if whatever the result is, just keep us posted.
Yeah, it's gonna be tricky because our conversation with the AG are confidential, and until they make a decision whether to proceed or not, we probably can't divulge a whole lot in a public meeting, but certainly be happy to tell you when there's decisions made about whether to proceed or not.
That'd
We
be
won't get to
great.
make that call, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? Yeah, Vince?
No, I appreciate the comments as well. And you talk about the opportunity ahead of us to have a more student-centered assessment system.
Yep.
To do something beyond pass-fail, to really think about the integration of formative assessments. So basically, what you just described is the absolute opposite of what we're doing right now.
Not really. Just what you're doing now, better
Well,
coordinated.
Pardon?
What you're doing now, just maybe a little bit better coordinated and better fine-tuned. I mean, you have a system now where districts are allowed, or corporations, I'm sorry, I keep using the wrong term, are allowed to choose the formative assessment they want, and it's funded. Previously, the state funded, Acuity, and there was some correspondence between Acuity and ISTEP. I think if you can get back to a system more like that, it may have
Where there's greater
a
integration
little more
and
cohesive,
alignment.
From a technology standpoint, then you've got your technology being used throughout the year, so at the end of the year, it's not an issue. Everything's, you've been using it all year long, that kind of thing. So there are a lot of other benefits to kind of maybe getting back to something like that.
Are there any other pieces? You mentioned the three. I'm just, any other, from you, with your expertise and so forth, that you would suggest that we should be thinking about? You
Any
talked about
other-
the integration of formative and summative assessments and how they align, something beyond pass-fail, student-centered.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a long list of ideas, and this is not really the place to start laying them all out, but
this is a pretty good place.
You want me to, I can give you an example.
No, but I would be interested to see that list of things that you believe would create a robust assessment system that gives us the kind of information we really need to improve instruction and to inform teachers and something that is immediate for teachers. And what does that ideal assessment system look like? I would be interested in seeing that from your perspective, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Rich.
Yeah.
Thank you.
BJ, Mr. Melton, you guys haven't had a chance to, haven't heard from you yet today. So.
All right, thank you very
thank you.
much. Seeing no more items on our agenda, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Second?
Ms. Superintendent, I'm sorry.
Oh, did
Can I
you
make
have
one
comment?
quick comment so that I get a chance to speak earlier because I was a little late? I just want to make a quick comment, and I apologize for being late. It ran into a little traffic on the way from Northwest Indiana. That was funny. First off, I want to thank the superintendent. We had a conversation and following up on the important issue dealing with the boiler issue at Roosevelt. I know a lot of the colleagues on the board expressed concern and interest on it. I do want to report out that the superintendent of Gary and her team, they did make a repair to the boiler and it's working. So of course students are back in. And I just want to thank the superintendent, Rich, in terms of letting me know that they're working on the strategy to find funding possibly to help replace the boiler. So just wanted to keep the board informed. Wanted to give the department a little bit more time to identify those resources in terms of making sure that it's not a Band-Aid fix, that we can do all we can on a state level, since it is a turnaround academy, to aid and assist the district. So just want, I apologize for if we break protocol. I just didn't get a chance to share that with the team.
All right, thank you. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Those opposed? We are adjourned.